Hello and welcome to Using APA Style. We're going to talk about how to use the APA style to format your references and also citations. I'm Dr. Ben Phillips from the School of Education at Union University. We'll look first at some sample references. This would be one of the entries on your reference list at the very end of the paper. I've made up just two examples for illustration purposes. The first one is going to be how to properly list the reference for a book. What I have here is a book from two leadership theorists. Hershey and Blanchard are credited with the idea of situational leadership. And so as an example only, if we were doing a book from Hershey and Blanchard, this is what the reference entry would look like on the reference list. You'll notice, for example, first of all, after we write the last name, we put a comma and then only the first letter of the first name. We only use initials for first names, and then if we knew a middle name, we would put that initial in as well. Also notice there's a comma after the P period. Sometimes we only think about using commas when there are three or more items in a series, but APA calls for a comma even if there's two authors. We use the ampersand instead of spelling out the word and then you'll notice that there are periods at the end of every major element within the entry itself. So there's a period at the end of the author's names, there's a period at the end of the year, a period at the end of the title of the book, and a period at the very end of the entry. The title of the book is Management of Organizational Behavior. You'll notice it's italicized, and it follows some very unusual capitalization rules. For this particular title, we would only capitalize the first word, and nothing else would get capitalized. After the title of the book, we have the city and the comma, the title, the state abbreviation, and then you'll have a colon there. This is where the publisher is located. After the colon is the actual publisher's name. Of course, there's Prentice Hall. So that's what the entry would look like if you're referencing a book. If you're going to reference a journal article, the entry would look like this one here at the bottom. First of all, you'll notice the top line looks the exact same. So all of that is similar to the way a book is. The difference comes after you finish the year. So I have 1972, close parentheses, the period, and then the next element would be the title of the journal article. The title of the journal article follows this unusual capitalization as well. I still capitalize that first word. I would capitalize always any word after a colon, the first word after a colon, and then you would capitalize any word that's a proper noun and would be capitalized anyway. So in this case, like the word American. Other than that, none of those other words should be capitalized. After the period that ends the article title, then I list what is the title of the journal. So in this case, it's the Journal of Leadership Issues. It is italicized, the journal name is, and it follows your more traditional rules of capitalization. There's a comma after the journal, and then there is the volume number for that journal. You'll notice it also gets italicized. Another comma, and then it has the page numbers at the very end, and then follows with a period. The page numbers are not italicized. The page numbers also do not have the word page in front of them. We don't put a abbreviation like a P or a PG. It's simply the numbers, 125 through 132. So in your reference list, if you have a book you want to reference, use the pattern that's listed there at the top, and if you have a journal article, you would follow the pattern there at the bottom. Now let's talk about citing our sources. Of course, we use APA formatting to cite sources in order to avoid plagiarism. We want to give credit where it is due to the author. There's two types of plagiarism. You can plagiarize an author's words, or you can plagiarize an author's thoughts. And we want to make sure we don't plagiarize in either way. In order to avoid plagiarism, we must cite our sources correctly. I'm going to show you 4 options for how you can cite your sources within your paper. First of all, back to the Hershey and Blanchard book, I have made up here, again just for illustration purposes, an exact quote. So directly from their book, they have this line. It says, for a situational leader to be effective, he must strike the perfect balance between selling and telling. And let's say that as the writer of my paper, I really like that line exactly as it's written. I don't feel like I can paraphrase that or word it any other way because it might lose some of its meaning or power. So I love the exact wording of the line. By the way, we would only use our direct quotes in our paper very sparingly. It's really when you find that exact wording and the wording is just golden, you have to use it. In that case, you do want to use a direct quote. Every other time you want to try to summarize or paraphrase an author's ideas, put them in your own words. But let's say we want to use that exactly as it's written. Well, of course, I cannot use those exact words without giving credit to the author. And so here's one way of putting that in my paper. I could say, according to Hershey and Blanchard, where I'm actually writing the author's names in the text of my sentence. After the author's names, I should put the year for the citation, 1972, and then now I have the direct quote. It's word for word, the way the authors had said it. By the way, APA does allow for you to change the capitalization in a direct quote if you need it for that first word. So the fact that I went from a capital F in 4 to a lowercase, that's no big deal. All of the wording is the same. It is in quotation marks, and at the very end, that's found on page 23. And so in this case, my citation is worded and filled out the right way to use that direct quote. That's one way to do it. So the citation and also those quotation marks are important. An alternate way to cite this source, so here's option 2, is instead of putting Hershey and Blanchard in the text of the sentence, I could simply put them at the end in one parenthetical citation. So I have the exact quote, it's in quotation marks, that's important, and then in parentheses Hershey and Blanchard, comma, the year, comma, the page number. Notice Hershey and Blanchard has the ampersand when it's used in parentheses, but in my earlier example, when I was simply writing it in the text as part of my sentence, I do spell out the word and. A little quirky rule about APA there. But this is a second way to incorporate that phrase into my paper. Let's look now at a third option, and this is for the option a person decides they don't want to do the direct quote, instead they want to reword the quote and put it into. And so maybe for an example, they have this idea. They write in their paper, for a situational leader to be successful, he should find the right balance between promotion and informing. You'll notice what the author of the paper has done is taken the quote from the book as it appears from Hershey and Blanchard's words and tried to swap out the words in order to avoid plagiarism. And so where the original author used the word effective, now in this paper I've chosen the word successful. Where the original author said he must strike, I've put in here should find. Instead of saying the perfect balance, this author is saying the right balance. And then finally, instead of saying selling and telling, we swapped that out to be promotion and informing. Almost like finding a synonym for every word in a thesaurus and simply swapping out the original author's words for new words. Some people look at that and say, well, since we have not used those exact words from the original authors in my paper, then I've not plagiarized. I've successfully avoided plagiarism by swapping out the words. But that's not exactly right. While that does avoid plagiarism of the author's words, it does not avoid plagiarism of the author's ideas. If that were listed in a paper based on that quote at the top, we would consider that to be plagiarism. You'll notice the idea is indeed the same, and the author of the paper cannot take credit for the idea when it really should be giving credit back to the original authors. And so if we're going to use this particular line in our paper, we do indeed need the citation at the end in order to avoid plagiarism of the original author's ideas. You'll notice, by the way, that there's no quotation marks since it's not a direct quote word for word from the original authors, and also there's no page number in the citation. The page numbers are only used when we are putting a direct quote into our paper. This is not exactly the best way for us to write papers. As a matter of fact, we really expect our graduate students to write in a more sophisticated manner than simply swapping out words, like looking them up in the thesaurus. Instead, what we'd like to see is we'd like to see students who read the original author's sentence, take what the meaning is and the ideas from the original authors, and then repackage them in a new sentence. And so while this example is indeed a third option, it's a way of doing that, it's not the most sophisticated and not the best way that we'd expect in our graduate students' papers. Here's a fourth option where the author takes those ideas from the book and then writes a brand new sentence. It says, for a leader to exercise situational leadership properly, he must blend the opposite concepts of encouraging buy-in and also direct commanding. In this case, the idea still belongs to Hershey and Blanchard, and so that's why the citation's needed. But it's a brand new sentence. Again, it's been repackaged by the person who's writing the paper. A much more sophisticated way to get that idea in the paper. A lot better than simply swapping out the words. this would be a fourth, and then in this case a better option than that third option of taking those ideas from the authors and blending them into my paper. Hopefully this has been helpful. Using APA style, we saw some examples of references, a reference entry for a book and also for a journal article, and then 4 different ways to do citations. Good luck on your paper.